Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our 2021 Handwashing Innovations Think Tank. My name is Ron Klemmer, and I serve as the Director for the Secretariat for the Global Handwashing Partnership. We're so pleased to have you with us here today. Next slide, please. And this is our fourth session of this year's think tank. We've been having great discussion and look forward to continuing that today. And thank you so much for making this happen, because it really is your contributions that really makes all of this happen. And next slide. And so just to go over a few of these guidances for this Zoom meeting, since none of us have been on a Zoom meeting since perhaps earlier today. Keep yourself muted and your video off unless you're speaking. You know, when we get to the breakout sessions, then you'll be speaking that whole time, and that's the heart of today's session. Raise your hand when we get to plenary if you have a question or if there's a burning question early on. But we will have the Catalyst presentations, breakout, and then the plenary. And I think everybody knows the Zoom features. We do have the Google folder. In there, we have a couple of tools that we'll talk about later for the breakout session. Next slide. So again, today is our fourth session of the think tank, and the topic is purposeful partnerships. And this is a really exciting topic for the Global Handwashing Partnership, because we are a public-private partnership. And so we want to look for how to optimize these partnerships. And next slide. And so what do we hope to achieve today? We're going to share some innovative thoughts about partnership models. And also, all together, we'll be identifying the value propositions of partnerships and looking for best practices. And next slide. And so here's the game plan for today. We're having this introduction of myself and my partners, and then we'll go from there to a Catalyst panel, which will be talking about their partnerships. And then from there, we'll be going to the breakout sessions where all of you will be contributing. And then we'll go to the plenary discussion where you'll be reporting back from those breakout sessions. And then we'll wrap up for today. And next slide. And so at this point, I'd like to hand this over to my partners for today, Renee and Miriam. And just looking forward to a great session. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Thanks, Ron. I'm not sure if Miriam is already in our session, so let me just start and give her some time to sort out the technicalities.
Great.
Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be hosting this session today. It's really close to my my heart and my work, so I really will enjoy all the great input you will have and doing the workshops together. A little bit about myself. My name is Renee Remijnse. I'm working with Essity, which is a hygiene and a global hygiene and health company. I've been with them for about 20 years. And since about 10 years, I have been working on different collaborations and partnerships. My first one was with Oxfam. I've worked with Ronald McDonald Houses. So I've seen the benefits it can bring and the win-win it can bring to find a good collaboration with a common goal. So I'll be really happy to see what your experiences are and how we can create much more of these collaborations going forward.
Okay, and Miriam?
Yes, thank you very much, Ron and Renee. So I am here, and I have been here. So just very happy to be here today. Obviously, this matters a lot to me because I started my hand washing career working with the public-private partnership for hand washing, as the Global Hand Washing Partnership used to be called before, and did quite a lot of my research, both for my master's and my doctorate, actually, working on that partnership. So really delighted to be here, really delighted to see the growth that the partnership is actually taking place, and that the vision set for this partnership, which was to put together a multi-stakeholder together to think about hand washing and to see how we can scale up, is actually taking place. So a little bit about myself. I'm Miriam Sidibe. I'm the founder and chief mission officer of Brands on a Mission, which is a B Corp focused on accelerating the impact on health and well-being brands and companies. And what I've been doing is spending a lot of time over the last, I guess, 20 years, thinking about how you rethink the business model for companies so that they can integrate partnership at the core of business model. So, and the reasons why partnership for us has been absolutely critical in the 15 years that I spent in Unilever, and and over the last couple of years as I'm gearing up with this company that I'm setting up, is really thinking about partnership less in terms of what CSR does, right? And less around philanthropic giving, but really thinking about how you bring expertise, scale together and making sure that you create complementary opportunities for us to create new pathways of delivery of effective intervention. So the way partnerships would drive is obviously driving more scale and credibility, and all of you on this call would know this. But the joint resources, expertise, and knowledge can drive scale and uplift sales if you're talking about the private sector. And obviously, a lot of my career has actually been spent thinking about how partnerships will help deliver as well for business growth as it will for social impact. And then the second element is already around advocacy. So positioning, whether we're talking about the public sector at the table, or you're talking about the private sector, or you're talking about the issue at hand, as a key global player in international forums, helping to drive awareness, discussions, influence policy to make sure that we can all impact the social issue at hand to be able to drive that. And obviously additional resources. A lot of very innovative partnerships have thought about blended financing as a way to combine variety of resources from marketing as well as for the public sector. And what we're looking for today in terms of partnership is what I consider and call the win-win-win partnerships. So win for the partners and the public sector because you're getting resources that you might have not had before in terms of not only financial resources, but also in terms of creativity, ways to deliver that you might have not thought before. Win for the brands, because I do think about brands, but much more in terms of the private sector and the business models, because it's going to help them accelerate with scale and depth in a way that's never been seen before, and obviously win for the people. And what I see as being absolutely critical is in sharing the same goal and the must being there by bringing different skills to the table, and of course remain ethical and very, very clear. So the social issue you're trying to solve through this partnership. And what it must not be is just a sponsorship, because that is not a partnership. That is what it's called, a sponsorship. So I think for me, that's the starting point here from this conversation. I have been thinking about purpose quite a lot over the last couple of years. I've even written an entire book around how to achieve social impact and business growth through purpose. And purposeful partnership is the heart of being able to really bridge the divide between what company and brands say versus what they do in a way that will benefit communities as a whole. And I'm delighted that today we're going to spend some time together rethinking this type of partnerships and what's innovative in the way partnerships of the future should look like, and what kind of competencies of the future should we equip both the private sector as well as the public sector to get there eventually. So that's the start, and looking forward to this conversation, and obviously co-facilitating with Renee and getting the guidance from Ron on the side as well. Thank you. Renee, over to you.
Thanks, Miriam. And building on what you just said about the win-win-win and also the benefits of partnerships and collaborations, as a commercial company, we will have definitely the same ambition. It's not about, talking the talk, but also walking the walk. And we try to have different kinds of partnerships and collaborations. And how we look at that is through these 3 A's. So we are always thinking, who should we partner up with, or what kind of topic is really about awareness raising on different topics. Where can you really create alliances together to change legislation or to get something really changed on the local level. And then there's also the part where you really should activate. So working really hand in hand in a country or with a government or with a specific NGO to really drive change. And what we really would like to do in any of our partnerships is it starts a lot with sharing knowledge. And that's a lot what we've been doing also here with the Global Handwashing Partnership. But this knowledge should then go into raising awareness. And that's what I really like about the think tank. Even last week, we discussed, the benefits of what is hand hygiene behavior going to change. So you see that all these great minds together really give a drive in how you can raise this awareness. Like I said, driving legislation, hot topic at the moment, and especially for hand washing, a great moment to get some things more formalized, especially as hand hygiene is now becoming much more part of, good health and the basic hygiene you should give to people. And then, of course, this activation and change. So if we look at some examples of how we've been doing this, then you see on the next slide that we need to have, as a company, we work in so many different markets and so many different countries with different focus points. So if you see that we have divided this a little bit between really recognitions and then really active partnerships. If you could just commence one slide. Super, thank you. So on the one hand, as a corporate company, we really want objective people to look at what we're doing. We don't want to, say it ourselves, wow, we're so good, because that's greenwashing, and that's not where you want to be as a company in this day and age. So you have here some recognitions, but then you really have these partnerships, and like we say, purposeful partnerships. And that's really how you should go into these. It should have really a purpose. And to get this purpose, we are working with different kinds of collaborations and partners to really tackle different kind of issues. So on the next slide, you see some examples of these 3 A's. For instance, when it comes to awareness, we are doing a lot of global research where we partner up with the WSSCC. And we've also been sharing this in this forum to learn more about the importance of hand hygiene and how people look at hand hygiene. Then when it comes to alliances, we have a great alliance with the United Nations Foundation, where we are, of course, a partner, but we're also speaking to companies, we're speaking to students, we're highlighting, Global Women's Day. But on the right, and that has been a really good thing, as a company, we can use our networks to get even more partnerships started. So we're inviting our customers and bringing them to the United Nations in Geneva. And from this, they suddenly start thinking about collaborations. So for me, that's one example of how you can create new purposeful partnerships by just inspiring and engaging other companies that maybe don't think about this every day. And then the activation, what you see in the middle, is really projects in countries that we do with Unicef. And then to close it off, just a short video of one of our examples, how we really work together on hand hygiene. Okay, so now we go into our next session, which is all about introducing our panel members. So if I can have the slide for that, then I'll be happy to introduce our three great panelists.
As we wait for the slide, I think something that Renee said right there, which was around greenwashing. These days I call it purpose washing. And I think that's something that we need to adapt to quite a bit. It's about, like obviously ensuring that, companies and brands and, don't jump on a social issue, and basically just, label themselves or put their tokens on partnerships that are not real partnerships, but are just trying to, drive themselves through the social issue. So just thought I'd add that into to your intro as well, Renee.
Yeah, and I think that's a very relevant comment, and I like actually this purpose washing, and that's what we see a lot. And we're not perfect either as a company, and I think many companies struggle with this, how to really do something engaging. So I really hope today we will also get some great input on how to do more than just have a common cause and discuss it and share knowledge, but also how can we really change things. And that segues a bit into my introduction of our panelists. So if I can have the next slide, super. So our first panelist is Helena Dolemore. She works at Unilever. She's a senior manager in global sustainability. And she focuses a lot on health and well-being, very relevant, of course, for the hand hygiene. And last year, she has been working a lot on hygiene, on the Hygiene and Behavior Change Coalition to really tackle COVID-19 issues. And I think Helena will bring a lot of expertise from working with both NGOs, governments, different countries, but also her perspective from a company point of view. So happy to have you here, Helena.
Thanks, and hi everyone. Great to be with you all.
And then we have Prieta Bisht from Unicef, and she has an abundance of experience in WASH programs, definitely in developing them, but also really in activating them, also short term or in difficult situations. And she has a lot of expertise, really including the communities to improve sanitations and hygiene. And she's of course a WASH specialist now at Unicef. And she leads also the hand hygiene program for all initiatives. So really good hand hygiene focus. And thanks for being here, Prieta.
Thanks, Renee. Happy to be here.
And then last but certainly not least, Maggie Raygia. She's from the National Business Compact on the coronavirus. So that's a really deep topic she has been working on. So she leads the National Business Compact Coalition Secretariat. And she's also a partnership consultant at Brands on a Mission. She has a lot of different cultural and sector challenges and knowledge that she brings to us. But also Maggie has worked with a lot of different stakeholders from Fortune 100 companies, but also really with activating in countries all over the world. So good to have you also here, Maggie.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here.
Super. And just to share a bit your experiences with partnerships and collaborations, I'm going to ask each of you to share a little bit of your experience with some recent work you have done. So Helena, if you wouldn't mind starting on that.
Sure, and thanks Renee, and thanks to the Global Handwashing Partnership for bringing us together today. I think it's brilliant to see so many people on the call and engaged in hand washing, because we all know it's such an important issue. Today I want to talk a bit about our coronavirus response, the Hygiene and Behavior Change Coalition, which Renee mentioned when she introduced me. The Hygiene and Behavior Change Coalition, I think we've got a slide on it on the next slide that we can show everyone. Really, when the pandemic struck last year in March 2020, we at Unilever, as a company that is the world's largest manufacturer of soap and with a deep history and heritage in hygiene behavior change, we wanted to see what we could do. And we wanted to see how we could bring our skills and our knowledge to help the global battle to control COVID-19. We needed to respond rapidly, coronavirus was spreading quickly around the world, and of course at scale to have a real impact. And really what was at the front of our mind was, you know, the concerns that all of us will have shared about those communities where access to wash is very difficult, social distancing is impossible, and really we needed to take action if we were to protect those communities from COVID-19. So we set up the Hygiene and Behaviour Change Coalition together with the UK government. What was then DFID is now FCDO, the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office, and also with the support of the London School for Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And what we sought to do was to bring together 21 partners, you'll see their logos on the screen, a huge range of NGOs, UN agencies that were working on the ground and were able to implement at scale. And what we sought to do was to raise awareness of what people needed to do to protect themselves from COVID-19, raise awareness of hygiene, but also give people the infrastructure and access that they needed to keep themselves safe. It's a £100 million partnership, which is made up of in-kind funding from Unilever and funding from FCDO as well. And I'm really pleased to say that we've actually reached 1 billion people in the last year. So as you can see, you know, having a huge impact across the world in over 37 countries, with a huge range of partners on the ground, helping us deliver to the last mile and reach the most vulnerable communities. We've also donated over 70 million products to support the efforts towards that as well. And just to give you one example, because I think these things are always easier to imagine if you have an example from the ground to illustrate how we work on the ground. I know we've got colleagues today who have been involved in HBCC in lots of different ways, but particularly in Kenya. And in Kenya, we had a great coalition of partners as part of the HBCC, working towards tackling COVID-19 as much as possible. And we actually created a mass media campaign, which you will see in the middle there, the Hand, Face, Space, Surface campaign. That's a set of global assets that can be used by any partner around the world. We've made them freely available. We use the best experts to create that, to really get the message out there about what you need to do to protect yourself from COVID-19 and practice good hygiene. We implemented that in Kenya, as in many places, over 15 countries. And we've also been able to adapt it to engage children, particularly. We've also adapted it for sign language to help people with disabilities, and a huge range of other formats and ways that we want to reach people with the Hand, Face, Space, Surface campaign. I've been told I've only got 2.5 minutes, so that is just a quick glimpse at HBCC and the scale of it, but you can also find out more on our website and look forward to sharing more about it.
Thanks, Helena, and we'll definitely come back with some more questions to the panel. But now I'd really like to hear from Prieta about her partnership.
Thanks a lot, Renee. Today, I'll talk about the public-private partnership for hand washing with soap in Indonesia, which is a multi-stakeholder platform at the national level. Maybe if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So this was established towards the end of last year and was largely triggered by the COVID pandemic. Those who are familiar with Indonesia, the country has a very strong institutional context when it comes to hand washing with soap. Hand washing is an integral part of the National Sanitation and Hygiene Program, which is led by the Ministry of Health, and it also forms part of the National School Health Program. So there are already existing regulations and strategies in place to implement hand washing programs in the country. With the COVID pandemic, as we've been discussing the past few days, hand washing shifted from being a private behavior to becoming a public behavior. And hand hygiene for all became the national theme. And it was very clear that the government couldn't achieve hand hygiene for 270 million Indonesians. So during the pandemic, especially from the private sector, we saw them getting involved in 3 specific ways. One, hygiene product companies came up with new product lines, new packaging for their products. They developed innovative and marketing and distribution strategies to make their products and services available to new customers, and also to reach out to a wide section of the population. Second, ensuring the health and safety of their own workforce became a key priority for businesses. So we saw many companies increasing and improving wash facilities within their workplaces. Third, a number of companies were already working in schools and communities as part of their CSR initiatives. And the pandemic provided the opportunity to strengthen some of these ongoing initiatives and partnerships. And one of the key learnings of the pandemic, which was very evident, was that it was essential to sustain these efforts going forward to reduce the risk of future outbreaks. And also that multi-stakeholder partnerships were required if we wanted to move from ad hoc one-time projects towards more national scale and achieve long-term impact. So this is what largely triggered the establishment of a national structure with public and private sector and development partners for hand washing with soap. So at present, we have a steering committee with 18 members. Strong government leadership is provided by the Ministry of Health. Coordination of the platform is led by Unicef. We have 9 private sector companies on board spanning different sectors. So we have key hygiene product manufacturers and suppliers who are part of the coalition, such as Unilever. We have Wings Indonesia, which is a really big Indonesian company for consumer products. We have Cousins, Reckitt Benckiser, Johnson & Johnson, Lixil. Then we have companies such as Adaro, Trekendo, who have very strong CSR programs covering schools and healthcare facilities. And we also have development partners such as USAID, Save the Children, SNV, who are very active in the hygiene space, and they're also part of the Global Hygiene Behavior Change Coalition. So a lot of work has already been done by the National Coalition. So last year on Global Hand Washing Day, the National Coalition launched a national call to action for hand washing with soap, which was signed or endorsed by 10 ministries. At present, the coalition is leading the development of the country roadmap, which, as you can see, covers the key components that is required to really bring hand washing with soap to scale. So let me stop here. Over to you, Renee.
Thanks, Prieta. And then I'll give it over to Maggie to talk about her partnership.
Thank you very much, Renee. And it was delightful to hear what you were saying, Helena. I'll start with the NBCC, the National Business Compact on Coronavirus, which was brought forth on the 16th of March, 2020, co-founded by one of our facilitators, Miriam Sidibe, the CEO of AMREF, Dr. Githinji Gitahi, and the chairman of the Marketing Society of Kenya, Theodore Munjia. And just 3 days after the first known record of the coronavirus was announced in Kenya, the NBCC came to birth. And it's a consortium of public and private multi-sectoral players who came together under the partnership and auspices of the Marketing Society of Kenya. And the NBCC's mission is to improve hygiene practices and contribute to saving lives, and at a no more important time than it is today, and saving life and protecting livelihoods by limiting the spread of infections in Kenya. And so our model, what we have created over the last year, is a proven delivery model that addresses behavior change communication and drives hygiene intervention using a very interesting network of private sector, NGO, and so forth. If you go to the next slide, I'll tell you what has made this possible. So next slide, please. We do have a broad a range of stakeholders, over 40 member organizations that have been endorsed, that are working under the Ministry of Kenya, of Government of Kenya, and endorsed by the UN family. And you can see the broad range of stakeholders we have there: hygiene companies, communication organizations, retail companies, business networks, digital experts, funders, you name it. And collectively, these entities have brought to the table a depth of knowledge and a breadth of experience that has been able to help us reach an incredible number of people at such a short time. For example, our first communication campaign was able to reach over 10 million people, and it was about building awareness about Corona. And then, as you heard from Helena, we were working with AMREF in Kenya, and we were actually part of the group that saw the development of the new communication, the behavior change communication, working in collaboration with Unilever Global, as well as the WPP, the agency that was developing this communication. And I was very pleased to see how it has been adapted even into younger groups of people. And the NBCC has been able, besides getting this communication that has reached over 24 million people within East Africa, we were able to get $1 million just in cash and kind locally, and then the 3.9 from the UK aid DFID, now called FCDO, and Unilever grant, working through AMREF. And we were also able to cover over 75% of government identified hotspots for the transmission of the disease, and making sure that we were putting hygiene facilities and supplies to vulnerable groups. So we were doing our work not just in communicating on how to change the behavior, but also providing them with the means to practice that. And so the NBCC has been very effective due to this partnership that we've forged, and we'd love to see how to go to the next level with you. Thank you, Renee.
Thanks, Maggie. I think it's really impressive to see a partnership with so many different people and businesses involved. Could you share a bit like a learning from working with so many different companies together?
Absolutely. So the one thing that the NBCC brought is it made everyone feel like they could contribute. Everybody had a seat at the table. And it was interesting to see how the collaboration brought in new opportunities that individual organizations were not able to realize by themselves. So it was fascinating how unlike people got to talk together, and suddenly they saw the impact of coming together. And we saw that a lot with our digital partners. We had a digital partner who could reach and access mothers, but then we had one who had AI technology that could transmit that to a much broader group. And together we were just saying, wow, we're able to reach 17 million people, 24 million people through that kind of collaboration.
Thank you. Prieta, a question for you, as you're so also embedded in the whole WASH programs. Is there a learning or a reflection how you can make sure a program like this is scalable, or it has a long-term effect?
Yeah, sure. I think what we found with the public-private partnership that we've set up in Indonesia is that one, it's very important to get leadership, to have leadership from the government. This is because the private sector and the development partners then see that the initiative is sustainable. And because we've had very strong leadership from the government, we have regular, active and sustained engagement from the private sector and from the development partners, because it sort of gives a form of legitimacy to the whole initiative, and also continuity. So it's not something that's going, that is there today and it's not going to happen today tomorrow. So I think that's really, really important in terms of having the government involved, and then each of them sort of gets reassurance from the other. So that's what we've seen. And secondly, we've seen that because we've been able to engage such a wide and diverse set of stakeholders, we are able to bring in the strengths of each stakeholder to every idea and every initiative. So strengths in the form of resources, expertise, networks, channels. And just to give you an example, so what we're working on currently is to roll out a national initiative to support the reopening of schools in Indonesia. So since we have a number of hygiene companies who have hygiene products, so we're going to be developing a COVID-19 Safe Schools kit, which will have all these hygiene products. Then we have the local government and the development partners who will then, support in terms of distribution to the different schools. So this is something that has shared value for everybody involved. So I think this is really important to, collaborate in the true spirit of partnership, and especially with the private sector. I think it's important to go beyond simply monitoring contribution from the private sector, because they have a lot to contribute. One is, like Miriam was saying in the beginning, to have a win-win partnership. And for the private sector, the more hygiene promotion that they do, especially hygiene companies, the more hygiene products they sell, So I think it's a win-win for everybody. And the second point is that private sector companies do really have a stake in the well-being of the communities that their businesses operate in. And we've seen that very clearly with COVID-19 pandemic. You know, so it's very important to really work with the private sector as a true partner.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Prieta. And being in the private sector, I do definitely agree with that. That there's also a responsibility from companies to do good and share, the assets and resources that they have. As a last question for this panel round, Helena, you're of course also in a commercial company. You are a big, the word commercial is always a bit tricky, I find. But what do you look at when you are exploring partnerships or collaborations?
That's a great question, Renee. And I think, you know, also drawing on others' comments about the different strengths that people bring to a partnership. I think what we look for in a partnership is the ability to have impact. And first and foremost, that comes from really being able to leverage our expertise and our knowledge in the best way to have impact. And I think HBCC, as a public-private partnership model that we've got, and I know many colleagues on the call have been deeply engaged with HBCC, we've really been able to combine that expertise to have a greater impact than the sum of our parts. You know, colleagues on the call from USAID have mentioned that USAID have also recently joined the coalition. Of course, we also have the backing from the UK government and FCDO and UK aid. We, Unilever, we contribute first and foremost our hygiene expertise in behaviour change, also hygiene products, and other you know, expertise in mass media, as I talked about before with the mass media campaign. You know, I think many of you will be aware we've been doing hygiene behaviour change for decades in Unilever. We have a suite of tried and tested programmes that are proven to work on the ground. And what we wanted to do in those early days of HBCC when we were setting it up was really rapidly scale them, offer them to the humanitarian, the development community to roll out in response to COVID-19, which was taking, you know, the whole world by surprise at that point. I think also, you know, we supported partners with media planning by media experts, looking at really how we could help NGOs in those early days, because, you know, in many countries, they were going into a lockdown. I think many partners are used to working on the ground on interpersonal programs. By definition, they require you going door to door, going to a health centre, going to a school, going to a community, which, you know, lockdown and social distancing simply made impossible. So they had to adapt too. And the brilliance of HBCC was that we were able to share our ability in how we reach consumers that way, so that they could reach populations and include the most vulnerable in those efforts as well. And I think just one point as well on where we take this going forward. Obviously, HBCC has achieved a huge amount in the last year, and we're starting to think now about what that looks like going forward, and how we really leverage the powerful coalition that we've created. And there's a real momentum, I think, at the moment for advocacy on WASH, working at a local, at a national, at a global level, to make sure that all of the momentum we've generated in the last year for the importance of hygiene and the importance of investing in hygiene, as well as hygiene behaviour change, making sure we sustain that momentum coming out of the pandemic. You know, even as some countries are at different places on the vaccine rollout, you know, in many countries, COVID-19 will be around for some time, and we need to make sure we embed good access to WASH for everyone universally in all countries. So I think advocacy, really important coming out of this as well.
Thank you, Helena. And I think that's a really good segue in what we want to do here today. We all feel that hand hygiene has not had that much attention as it had the last year, but you know, we don't want to go into a situation where we let it go and it slips back into not being as important as it is now. So I'm really looking for really looking for all the other win-win-win expertises and how to make hand hygiene a fixed part of everybody's health and hygiene programs. So let's go into the next chapter of this meeting.
Well, Renee, Miriam, and all of the panel, thank you so much for really the exciting discussion. really forms a catalyst for us as we move forward into our breakout discussions. And next slide. So we will be going through breakout discussions today, and we'll be focused on 2 questions. The first question is to think about your partnerships. And when we say partnerships, we're not just talking about partnerships around hand washing. We're just looking for best practices around partnerships. Any kind of partnerships that is a public entity with the private sector, or a nonprofit organization with the private sector, any of these public-private partnerships. So with those partnerships, what made them successful, and what have been your learnings of those best practices? So we're driving down to best practices there. And then what are the essential elements to ensure scale and sustainability of hand washing partnerships? So those are the 2 questions. We'll come back to those questions in a second, but next slide, please. So the way we're going to have these breakout sessions, and if you were with us on the first day of the think tank, you've been through this before, we're going to start with a very small group, groups of 2, or maybe 3. And so you'll go into those groups automatically, and then from there, you'll be combined into 2 groups. And so that's a group of 4 or 5. And then finally, we'll be combined into 4 groups of about 8 people. As you go through here, in the first group, we want you to come up with a maximum of 5 answers to each of these 2 questions. When you get to the second groups, and you'll automatically be flown into these groups, so you don't have to worry about going to a certain group. They'll all happen automatically. Then we want you to whittle that down to 4 answers to each of these questions. And when we get to the final group, the large group, we want you to whittle that down to 3 top answers for each of these 2 questions. And so there is a prioritization step here, as all of you bring your expertise in partnerships to this discussion. And we have provided some tools to go through this, to take notes. There's an Excel file, and Erin is sending that out, an updated file to everyone. And then when we get to this 3rd group, the large group, not only do we want you to take your notes, and that's just for you, but then we also want the big group to put your answers, these 3 top answers for each of the 2 questions, into a PowerPoint slide, which you have also been sent. And so that's how the breakout session will work. And next slide, please. And so again, here's the questions that you'll be addressing. And so you'll go to the very small groups, and you can have, I was just looking at the chat, make sure there wasn't any big questions. But in the very small groups, you can have up to 5 answers for each of these 2 big questions. In the next group, limit that down to 4 answers. And then when you get to your larger group, prioritize that down to 3 answers for each of these questions. So again, not just hand washing partnerships, but any partnerships that you've had with the private sector, public-private partnerships, what has made them successful, and what have been the learnings about best practices. So what were the best practices of those partnerships? Answer that. And then the other question is, what are the essential elements to ensure scale and sustainability of hand washing partnerships? And that's the questions that you'll be answering. Again, when you get to the last group, then you'll be putting that into a PowerPoint slide, and then you'll be brought back into plenary and presenting the answers of your last group, those 3 top answers for each of these questions. And please have somebody ready to present that when you come to plenary. Okay, we'll have fun.
Oh, I see Ben Tidwell is joined. Hey, Ben. They can't hear me. Oh, people have started joining back.
Oh, I'm back. Hi, Miriam. How are you?
I'm good, Ben. How are you doing?
Wonderful.
Yes, I think everyone is back on. I believe. So how did you all feel about this exercise, this 2, 4, 8 multiplication exercise? And I wanted to just let everyone know if you could just maybe share your reactions or raise your hand, and then I'll just call up on you from the raising hand. So how did you feel about this? Because I mean, we're interested to know whether this is an exercise we scale up. So I see Janita is saying it really made for a really good discussion. I don't know, maybe John Hines, if you want to say something. Or you didn't raise your hand, but I saw a thumbs up.
I was doing a thumbs up. So you can have an old school thumbs up as well.
I know. Fantastic. So did it allow for great intros and meeting new people and building upon ideas, or what did you think? How did you think it went? So I don't know whether anybody raising hands, or should I pick on more people? All right. Maybe Maggie, do you wanna say something?
Yes, thank you. It was a good opportunity to just hear different perspectives, because and then also find so much similarities in the discussions. So
okay.
Yeah, we didn't get to do a full intro in our team. We started and then we were bounced off to another group. But it was good when it lasted.
Yeah, no, I spent some time in that group, and I came just when you guys were starting to introduce each other. So I was like, wow, they've just been working on the task, how task-oriented group that is. So that's fantastic. So, you know, join is, yeah, that's fantastic. Great. If you think this is something that you would be able to get to the depth of the issues, because I think that is usually what ends up happening. This gives us a chance to think about that. So what we thought we could do is, you know, as we, you know, obviously going to ask the 2 groups to share and report back what they went through. Obviously, I'm taking notes, and we're going to start thinking about the overall comments and really starting to think about what's really needed to drive partnership to scale, sustainability, and obviously what makes it successful. So it would be great if we can ask group 1 to maybe start sharing their key points on what do they think is essential partnerships element. Who's the lead rapporteur on group 1?
We didn't actually get to that. So if anyone from my group wants to jump in now, otherwise I'll do it. I guess I'll do it. So we had a really lively discussion. It was really great. Lots of different perspectives. So a couple of points. Really important to understand and align where possible goals of the partnership, and to make efforts on either side to meet each other's needs. And that includes some of the communication and how the partnership is presented. And of course, they each has restrictions and different abilities, and sort of making the greatest possible effort to come together on that. Actually, the second point is included in the 5th, so I skipped that. Then we have an implementation model to deliver sort of on the last mile or on the ground, to really figure out how this partnership will pan out. and at the same time extend the benefits of the partnership to all market actors, to not give as public actors, we don't want to give one an advantage of one over the other, but really build an ecosystem that makes the market work better for every consumer and every every company and every market actor. And then the fourth one, a really interesting research perspective that we have, research transparency by publishing results of research and M&E that is relevant to public health. For example, the microbiological effectiveness of hand hygiene products. We had Astrid in our group who said that this was publishing this kind of research is standard in a lot of malaria research, because there was an active partnership with academia who will then publish results, but that's not so much the case with hand hygiene in this area. So that's an encouragement which eventually will benefit all of the sort of the ecosystem of the hand hygiene market. And then the fifth one, which we got stuck on in the end, the investment in partnerships and coordination and communication and a clear governance structure, which includes a coordinator position and we sort of said at least one partner should be there whose number one objective is the partnership and is holding partners accountable and sort of coordinating the actions, like the GHP Secretariat is doing, like we had in other partnerships, one position that is responsible for driving things forward. We then discussed, should this be an accountability of this one partner, but we really settled on this should be a shared accountability, and every partner is accountable, but really there's like this one resource to coordinate and communicate. I think the one thing that's missing in this list now, and I'll add this later, I'll make an edit, we also discussed a lot about complementarity of skills and access to resources. My favorite example was access to a 3D printer, which for Unicef would take forever to organize, and a plastics manufacturer would just have at hand. So it's really expertises, reach of the partner, and the resources that they can bring to the table. Anything to add from my group?
Fantastic. This is great. All right. Well, this is fantastic. I don't know whether anybody from group 1 wants to add anything from this list before we listen to group 2, and then we can just have a compare of the two groups, and then see whether there is like how can we make that list a bit more either exhaustive or more encompassing. But great job, Janita. I think it's pretty good. Anybody from group 1? So if not, nobody wants to build at this stage, let's just listen to group 2. And who is the rapporteur?
So I volunteered to take notes, but actually not with the idea that I would also be presenting, because that seems like you're volunteering yourself to do the big job that's visible. So if someone else wants to come in and do this, I welcome them. Maggie, you're laughing. It sounds like you're...
Well, because you were quite categorical that you didn't want to do it and no one's standing up. Sean, do you want to say anything, or before I hog the mic?
Go for it, Ben. It's easier to articulate the notes you wrote, I think.
Yeah. Probably other people can't understand my notes anyway. So we were trying to get down to 3 bolded points, but since the other group had 5, I bolded a couple of others here editorially near the end. We sort of tried to group, like some of the prior sessions, sub-bullets are the way to get around, restrictive guidance. So we tried to group into who to engage, how to engage, and then how to sustain impact the partnership, something. Don't read too closely into any of the wording on any of this. I think we talked about starting with existing partners, those with existing relationships, to the degree possible, certainly if you're talking about something like COVID and emergencies. But with complementary skill sets, I think this is a lot of our best principles were the inverse of failed partnerships from the past. So I don't know if that's just wishful thinking, that if we could change those things, maybe the partnerships would be more effective. But I think often partners have a different view of what their skills are versus what the other partners have a view, and there's overlapping skill sets. And so, this isn't a USAID bid where you have a prime and some subs. This is, something quite a bit more challenging. So clearly establishing those. I wanted to flag one thing we said here. So, we're talking about these partnerships. We're talking about, multinationals and multilaterals and government agencies and the voice of communities, right? Like we're in this for businesses to profit for everyone else's own institutional roles. But I think it's challenging to maintain that voice of local communities when you're talking about these sort of broad partnerships to bring large scale impact. And so trying to figure out how to bring those in is really important. I think on engagement, what's in it for me, I think it's very difficult for everyone to understand what kind of incentives are at play for other kinds of actors. I think everyone says that and then thinks they do understand, but they don't, promise. Having worked for multiple of them in the last few years. And then a shout out to Ron and Aaron. We think you guys should have lots of job stability. Because we think the idea of having funded staff roles, similar to the point of the other group on sort of a partner whose primary role is the partnership. So there's some accountability and some forward movement there, I think is key. And then one thing I didn't bold, but the idea of like not all partnerships, it's not a failed partnership if it doesn't continue indefinitely necessarily, right? Like it might have a time-bound specific objective that was achieved and ends, and that's great. So to be thinking about that from the beginning. I'll let others come in from my group if people have clarifications or other points to raise.
Well, anybody else? Otherwise, because I'm looking at the time and I want to make sure that we get into a conversation together. Ben,
sorry, yeah, I'm done.
You're done. All right. Well, I mean, I think this is great. I think the two opportunities and the two rapporteurs and the two groups are done complementing anyway, right? So if you look at it, there's a list of essentials, and there is basically almost a roadmap of how you're going to, be able to face relationships, which I think is fantastic. So, what I think would be great for us to discuss is to see how eventually, as we proceed from here and you go with a bit of a framework of how you're going to drive successful partnerships, what are some of the things that we all talked about that seem to be in the two groups and that seems to be absolutely critical? So yes, we talked about goals, we talked about governance, we talked about implementation model and having this last mile, which I think becomes very important, research transparency and coordinations and communications. But what I thought was really interesting in group 2 was also a roadmap to success, right? Which is, how do you choose the partner? So who to engage, and then how to engage, and then how to sustain impact. But one thing that came up very strongly, which I thought was very interesting also, was not necessarily this time bound to partnership success. Because it isn't because the partnership stopped after 6 months or a year. If there was a particular set objective and goals to being able to deliver a particular set of objectives, that actually means that the collaboration hasn't been successful. I think the interesting part here is to think about what kind of models of collaborations you can tap into that will give you where we are. So it would be great to hear from your perspective what you would add in these two. So if we were to be able to share this list with people that weren't in this group today, and we thought, okay, so if we were to, you need to think about your partnerships. What are some of these, how do we transform this into questions that people would actually use to see on their checklist on whether their partnerships have a chance to succeed, has a chance to be able to scale up, and has a chance to be able to sustain. So what is there anything else in here that we haven't actually looked into between the two of you that you think, between the two groups? And I mean, feel free to, please raise your hand. Because I mean, one thing for me that is clear, and that's obviously a lot of my background, is this whole, overcoming of resistance of working with corporations, for example, which I didn't see mentioned anywhere. So, but it would be great to maybe think about. Janita?
Yeah, I really like this last point. Do we need to sustain partnerships, or can it be time-bound partnerships? And then how do we? I think the question is more, how do we reach the goal of the partnership? And if the goal is to continuously advocate and keep hand hygiene on the agenda, like for GHP, then there might be need for I guess sustainability thinking. But if the goal is to bring about a product to the market, or build a market, or develop a product, or a marketing strategy or whatnot, it could be a time-bound partnership with and then there's no it's not a failure if it finishes after a couple of years, right?
No, it isn't. And we've seen in the case, I mean, I think about, if you look at coronavirus and COVID and collaborations that are being made at national level, and this is something that also came up very clearly in both the examples in what you're talking about. It's this global versus local, right? And sometimes you could have a global overarching partnership like the HBCC Unilever is driving, where there's set amount of pool of money with FCDO and a corporations together to give to, to then deploy through different NGOs and different collaborations. And then there is what you could do at a national level, like what we've seen with Indonesia and what we've seen with the National Business Compact, for example. The National Business Compact was only really alive for a year. I mean, it's still there, but it's a dormant partnership. It's more like a model of collaborations that you can reopen when you need it and how you need it, right? So that, partners that normally wouldn't have worked together realize that they have different skill sets in a response of a pandemic, for example, or a particular issue at the moment. So I thought, that for me is something that I think is quite interesting in terms of not only the sustenance, but the kind of models of collaborations that are required to get to, I guess, getting to a goal that has been set by the social issue that you're dealing with, and in this case, hand hygiene, right? So how are you going to make hand hygiene sustainable and scalable for everyone? And it depends on where you are. If it's in the country thinking about hand hygiene built into the system and the frameworks, and obviously all the way to policy level, and it needs to continue beyond COVID-19. But it may be that during this pandemic, at a particular time at local level, you create collaboration to get to that quickly, because it's absolutely essential. So I thought that, is about the scale. I didn't really see in any of the two groups the real importance of scale. And I wonder why that is, because, obviously looking at it from the private sector perspective, a lot of what we do is scale, because scale actually drives, more use of the products, more use of the product drives more sales. So scale has always been important. But I'm always telling the team in the private sector that scale shouldn't forget impact, right? Because there's no point in just getting out there to billions of people if you're not actually sure that you are reaching impact and you're actually, documenting that impact. So I don't know whether people can have a bit of a conversations on scale versus impact, and what exactly would that mean for you?
Miriam, if I could just go into that as we are closing up. I think the scale is really interesting, and for me, what's really helpful is that now we have this scaled theme of hand hygiene for all. Where we have different groups working together on the same topic. I think that is a really good progress, that we can, bundle all the things together instead of having sometimes, 40 or 50 different projects that are quite similar. So I think that's having this together in one theme and doing more together and sharing more from there would also be really beneficial for having it long term. So I really appreciate this new partnership with the Hand Hygiene for All overall campaign.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think Cara raised her hand. Cara from SC Johnson.
Yeah, so I was just going to add to what you were talking about. It's been super interesting for me to listen into these conversations, because from a private sector perspective, what I define as a partnership is is not necessarily like consortiums or conferences or kind of groupings of people that are coming together. But when we work with someone, basically, I mean, sorry if I offend anybody by my language, but people that want to get shit done, right? So like we prioritize what is our target and what is our outcome, and then everything else kind of falls into place. So yeah, it's super interesting because some of our partnerships tend to be probably smaller groups than what I saw as examples today, like huge, many people involved in these programs, versus kind of how we approach it is not necessarily smaller, you know, in impact, but like certainly focused and making sure that the people involved have specific roles and specific skill sets that they're bringing to the table.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think a really important point, and it keeps coming back to this complementary skill sets, and it's about addressing the right model of delivery, right? That's going to be effective and that's going to make the best use of everybody's skill set. And we heard from the Unilever team and even, you know, the Unicef team, Prieta Bisht, you know, around the importance to use what you bring to the table best, and then find a way to obviously make that even more impactful and more scalable. So Prieta, maybe, I know you're raising your hand.
Yes, I just wanted to make a quick point about this. So this the discussion on scale did come up in our group as well, and maybe Julia would like to sort of, you know, sort of give an example on this as she did in our group. But just to mention, you know, so we discussed that it makes business value and business sense to the private sector, especially when it comes to innovation of new products and supply of hygiene products, if there is scale, or they can see scale in this, but that needs to be matched with partners or a sort of an arrangement to be able to reach customers, and you know, they require population. So in this sense, the supply really needs to be matched with demand. So it needs to go hand in hand. So because no use having, you know, a supply of products in the market if we can't really, you know, have demand matching it. I think that's a point that we discussed in our group.
Oh, thank you. A really good point as well to add. I mean, look, I'm looking at, I think we've got 2 minutes. The 2 minutes that we have, you know, I think we've made some super important points. Prieta, your hand is still up. I'm not sure whether it's an old hand or it's a new hand.
No.
But yeah. You know, in the it's an old one. Yeah. So in the 2 minutes that we have, I thought maybe what we can do is maybe wrap up thinking about what is the future of purpose-led partnership, because we started having these sessions around what would purpose-led partnership look like. And what we actually did is share a couple of very innovative types of partnership, from the HBCC partnership, which, you know, it's a very interesting blended model, financing model of you know, donor plus corporations, and then delivery models through different NGOs, and coming up with, you know, what Unilever can do from a creative perspective, as well as you know, channeling some of the resources. So there was that. There was 2 great examples at local level in Indonesia, you know, which is the PPPHW in Indonesia, and then the National Business Compact in Kenya. And, you know, what struck me obviously was like the breadth of knowledge and experience there is already, people coming together, and how important it's been and how collaborative it's been, even during this pandemic, but beyond that. Hand washing with soap, or hand hygiene, as we talk about here, is already generating a lot of innovative partnerships at the moment. And then it's something that hopefully we can really learn from, and that is not going to stop once COVID is finished, and that we can you know, that we can take this in the future. So I think for me that's really important. I think the other part that I know Renee is going to talk about in her comments is going to be, for me, is is obviously the kind of conversations that you've had, to see the diverse background of people that actually joined this session, and to see how they managed to get together to a point where we actually have a list and a checklist, which we could share in terms of what would make your partnership successful, and who to engage, how to engage, and the best way to drive the sustainability throughout. So I think absolutely critical. And then finally, I hand over back to Renee now to do the closing words. But this is about securing partnerships and collaboration model, so that we all realize that there's no way we can drive this kind of scale impact on our own and in isolation. And I think if there's one thing that session has done, is share a bit of that expertise all together. So Renee, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Miriam, and thanks everybody for this great contribution. I think we have, seen some really shared topics that we can bring forward, but also a lot of great examples. I just want to remind everybody, please come back to us next week for the closing session, because then you will get a great overview of all the different think tank activities. So please remind yourself in the agenda. I think as a closing, what I want to say from my own experience, but I saw that a lot in your discussions as well. I think for any purposeful partnership, it begins with doing something that is really close to your core business. Do something where your strengths are, where your capabilities are, where you're, where you have a lot of experience. And then secondly, it all starts with mutual respect. So be open about your expectations of each other. Be open about how you can contribute or what your limitations are, but also really be very clear on what does a successful partnership looks like for everybody. So you really start with that mutual understanding, and that also gives you a way to adjust your program along the way to make sure everybody is reaching their own targets there. And I think last for me is I've never been in a totally right partnership or a totally wrong partnership. I think it's really good that we just keep starting up and learn by doing, and then do what you have learned. So let's all build on each other's strength, on each other's dedications on different topics, and I'm sure there will be a lot of good purposeful partnerships for the future. And thanks everybody for joining.